The castles of Teutonic Prussia. Here's the land that once used to be called Prussia, a wooded land covered with lakes and marshlands, bordering on the Vistula in the west, the Baltic Sea in the north, and the Lithuanian forests in the east. It were the Prussians who came first to inhabit the area, a pagan people with no organized state system, whose daily occupations consisted in hunting, agriculture, rearing of animals and trade. In the year 1226, a Polish duke, Conrad of Mazovia, endangered by repeated raids and plunder of his Prussian neighbors, requested the military assistance of the Christian knights of a German order under the invocation of Our Lady. Teutonic Knights, as they were called by Polish men, the brothers and fathers of the order, arrived from Palestine, where in the year 1198, during the Third Crusade, they received the rule of order, after the fashion of Johannites and Templars orders. The white gowns were ornamented with a large black cross. The objects to ornament their hands were swords. The 13th century marked the decline of crusades to the Holy Land. Conrad's invitation to come to the north gave Teutonic Knights an opportunity to continue their military mission. Here in East Prussia, they would be able to carry on their struggle against the infidels, and what's more, they would establish their own state on the land they conquered. It is right here, between the lower course of the Vistula and the river Niemen, where the most powerful monastic state in the world was created over 7 centuries ago. The excellence of the state's organization drew its strength from the military and monastic rules of discipline and the dense network of fortresses that spread across the area. In the 15th century, Teutonic Knights had at their command about 120 castles dotted all over the area of Prussia. No other region in Europe could boast of such an abundance of fortifications, not to mention their quality. Let us have a closer look at the walls. Let us try to decipher the silent tale about the rise and fall of the Atlantis. Radzeń Chełmiński is a remembrance of the very initial period of the conquest of Prussia. One of the earliest castles was built here by the order. First, it was erected as a wooden fortress, started in 1234. Later, a brick construction took its place, located on the area of a former Slavonic site. Initially, it was meant to guard the border between the district of Chełmno, granted to the order by Conrad of Mazovia, and the province of Prussia, that was being conquered gradually at that time. In later years, during the rise of the Teutonic state, it was the seat of the local commander and convent. There is nothing strange about the fact that the first fortifications were made of wood. The early fortifications were erected hastily and consisted mainly of soil and wood, most often oak wood. Gradually, when the war moved northwards and eastwards, brick walls took the place of wooden constructions. The only hard and solid material available in this part of Europe was brick. Stone was brought from the surrounding fields and was in sufficient quantity to merely lay the foundations of the castles. The works were carried out by local masters under the supervision and according to the instructions of the order. The masters, in turn, supervised the work of other workmen and craftsmen, such as stonemasons, bricklayers, carpenters, locksmiths, glaziers, and hundreds and at times even thousands of helpers who were recruited from enslaved Prussians and village settlers. The building site was being well guarded all the time. In Radzeń, which is now referred to as an example of the so-called permanent ruins site, an observant eye can still notice numerous signs that testify the high level of artistry of those builders and craftsmen. In the remnant parts of the main wings of the fortress that used to be flanked with 4 turrets in the corners, there are still remains of the chapel, the refectory, this is the dining hall, the assembly hall, the entrance gate with its pointed arch, and the cellars. Also, part of the walls surrounding the main area of the castle has been preserved. In the middle of the 15th century, at the end of the 13 Years' War to be exact, Radzin, like many other Teutonic castles that were taken over by Polish administration, performed the function of the seats of royal starosty. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the castle fell into ruin, being devastated by Swedish invaders and Prussian officials. And yet, it stands there. It still exists and guards the realms of memory. The slope rising from the Vistula River, the beautiful castle of Gniew is towering, and is spreading its watchful gaze at the boats on the river. The castle, its outlay based on the shape of a square, with its high and slender towers in the corners, was the first fortress of the Teutonic Order to be located on the west bank of the Vistula. Here we see the fronton of the Teutonic state of the Gdańsk-Pomerania region. The castle was under construction from the year 1283 till the mid-14th century. It is the symbol of the German knights' pursuits that finally found their end in the capture of the Polish city of Gdańsk in 1309 and control over the entire Pomerania region. On that very date, the Teutonic state became the deadly enemy of the Polish kingdom. The recovery of the lost territories, including the access to the Baltic coastline, became the goal of highest priority for Polish monarchs residing in Wawel in Krakow. Gniew, very much like Radzin, became the seat of a Teutonic commander who performed jointly monastic, military and administrative duties. Together with his convent, made up of 12 knight brothers and 6 priests, the commander supervised a territorial unit referred to as Komturstwo, Commandership District. The castle was central to the district and was at the same time the visible symbol of political, military and economic power. The subjects of the Teutonic state that were recruited from the settlers of the neighboring countries and the remaining part of Prussian population, peasants, townspeople, secular knights and non-Teutonic clergy, must have all understood very well the symbolism of domination embodied in the lofty towers and castle walls. After the recovery of Pomerania by the Kingdom of Poland in the middle of the 15th century, the castle became the seat of the starosty. In the year 1667, Jan Sobieski, later the King of Poland, became one of resident starosties. The Gniew fortress survived Teutonic wars, the Swedish invasion and Napoleonic campaigns, and sadly, its interiors lost their excellence in the fire of 1921. Today again, there is a chance for it to return to its former glory. Is situated on the right bank of the Drvenca river, on an upland promontory at whose feet we shall find the town of Dobrzyn, woven into the meanders of the river. The castle, that was erected in the years 1302 to 1329 in place of a former wooden fortress, guarded the Teutonic Polish border. It is another example of a fortress monastery that used to be the seat of both the commander and the convent. The subdivision into the high castle and the approaches of the castle has been clearly preserved till today. The main part, based on the shape of a square, is filled with exceptional charm, dwelling within its picturesque courtyard and galleries. south wing we shall find the capitulary, infirmary, and a beautiful chapel under the invocation of the Holy Cross with its stellar vault and polychromy ornamentation. In the east wing, there were the sacristy and the refectory. The latter has not been preserved. In the north wing, there were dormitories for the community and a passage leading to the so-called gdanisko, that is, to the toilet. The second floor housed the granary, storeroom and arsenal. Teutonic brothers, which may seem paradoxical today, were not only monks but also warriors, all in accordance with the rule of the order. They were famous in the entire late medieval Europe. Initially, still when in Palestine, they consisted exclusively of Teutonic knights. During the conquest of Prussia and later, during the wars against Lithuania and Poland, Teutonic knights represented the minority within their own army that was mainly made up of the subjects of the Teutonic state, mercenary troops, and representatives of Western European knighthood. These forces consisted of heavy cavalry, first of all, which from the end of the 15th century onwards was supported by artillery, infantry, and very well-kept supply columns. Teutonic knights had also a fleet of ships at their disposal, which, at the turn of the 15th and the 16th centuries, were able to set sail to the regions as far as Gotland. The secret of the army's power lies in the efficiency of commandership, the discipline, as well as the tremendous funds spent by the order for military purposes. The military power of the German monks, with their castles, did not prove to be invincible, however. Golub surrendered in the years 1410 and 1422 to King Jagiełło, and after the second peace of Toruń, the fortress was entirely taken over by Poland. The years of 1616 till 1623 are said to be the time of exceptional prosperity of the castle, when it belonged to Anna Vazovna, a sister of Sigismund III. It was thoroughly redecorated in the Renaissance style and turned into a kind of a palace that was crowned with a characteristic attic. In the corners, two-story-high turrets were added, while the southeast tower was lowered and the main tower removed completely. Today, Golub is still attracting the knights from all over Poland and Europe. This time, it's not the deadly wars that bring them here, but it's the famous tournaments that introduce the lively spirit into the seat of former commanders and starostis. Here is Nijica, the castle of the prosecutor. From 1409 onwards, it was the seat of a Teutonic chief officer. It was erected on a low hill, surrounded by marshlands and protected by the Nida River from the south. The gradual departure from the strict rules of monastic life in the state of German knights was also reflected in the change of overall shape of the castles built at the end of the 14th century. The Nijica castle, that was built in the years 1380 to 1400, resembles more a magnate residence rather than a monastery. The towering mass of the building was based on the shape of an elongated rectangle. Its view has no other match in the entire Prussia. The fortress is guarded by two massive towers with the gate passage built in between and apartments and guest rooms. All of it is surrounded by a lower wall to protect the castle from flooding. A wooden passage runs around the courtyard and links up all the wings of the fortresses. Here is an apartment house that encloses the space on the western side. It used to be the location of the refectory, the chapel and the chancellery, all beautifully ornamented with stellar vaults. The double bay apse of the chapel was protruded beyond the walls of the wing. The mural paintings that have been very well preserved depict the martyrdom of the 10,000, the bow of the Magi, the Epiphany, and the figures of the four evangelists. Situated on the Mazovia border, at the crossroads to Działdowo and Królewiec, Kaliningrad, the castle played an important role as the intermediate trading post for Mazovia. In spite of the prohibition on trade, which was part of the order's rule, in the middle of the 14th century, Teutonic knights developed commerce on a large scale. The principle of profit is the one that ruled. Workshops became part of the approaches of the castle, land was cultivated, and cattle were raised on huge farms. Monastic dispensers traded with almost all corners of the continent. They sold mainly grain, amber, linen and wood. The Teutonic state was the only state with no foreign debt. Such a policy ensured tremendous profits, which in turn made it possible to wage wars, live in comfort and create excellent pieces of architecture, like the Nijica castle. The network of castles within the Teutonic state also comprised instances of such fortresses that did not belong to the order directly, although they were tightly integrated with the entire defense system known as Burgen system. Here is Lidzbark, a former residence of Warmian bishops located within the fork of the Winna and the Samsarna rivers. It is now the best preserved fortress of the entire Teutonic Prussia. The brick castle was erected in the years 1350 to 1401. It was located on an earlier Teutonic site. The regular shape of its main part consists of 4 residential wings flanked with delicately ornamented turrets on consoles and the massive main tower based on a polygon-shaped layout. The latter housed the dungeon, the dark cell, guardian quarters and a small chapel. The approach of the castle on the south was solidly fortified. The courtyard is surrounded by a beautiful one-story high gallery. The arcades of the gallery embrace the space around a former well and thus create a kind of a cloister garth. There once used to be a fountain in the place of the well, sprinkling out of a lime tree trunk. Presentation halls were located on the first floor. It is right here in the great refectory hall, in the gallery, in the capitulary and the chapels where we can admire the mural paintings best preserved in entire Poland, which exemplify the late medieval interior decoration of magnate residences. Exceptional mural painting introduces to us this beauty array of frescoes to be admired on the walls of the gallery. Here is Jesus Christ and his mother, who spread protection over a bishop who's climbing up towards them. Paintings of similar content are a rarity in the area of former Prussia. The south wing of the castle houses the capitulary. We shall find here a pictorial representation of the body of superiors of Varmian diocese. Among them we can recognize the figures of Jan Striprok, Jan of Mischnia and Henrik Sorboma. The entire eastern wing of the fortress houses the largest hall in Lidzbark, which is the most magnificent at the same time. It is the great refectory, whose fine vaults are impressive. The frescoes of Lidzbark, except for clearly religious themes, had also a slightly implicit and yet a clear political expression. The scene of the raising of Mary, the patroness of the order, as well as the patroness of Varmian diocese at the same time, or the galaxy of Varmian bishops, were a clear manifestation of their independence from the Teutonic state. As the seat of the bishop, the castle played the role of one of the two capitals of Varmian district, Fromborg being the other. Apart from the representative of the church, the castle also provided residence to the state representative chief officer, that is the vice minister of secular affairs, and to the steward of the estate, the treasury. During the period of Warmia's national status as part of the Polish kingdom, that is from the year 1466, till the beginning of Prussian monarch's reign, the court of bishops in Lidzbark radiated the excellence of its culture across the entire country and was, at the same time, a counterbalance to the Protestant duke's court in Królewiec, Kaliningrad. Among the most outstanding figures of that time, we shall find the names of Łukasz Waczenrode, the uncle of Nicholas Copernicus, Cardinal Stanislas Hozjusz, Jan Dantyszek, and the prince of Polish poets, Ignacy Krasicki. Until today, the castle reflects the golden qualities of the centuries and people gone by. The second residence of Varmian bishops, and at the same time the centre of administration for their estates, that comprised 1/3 of the diocese's area, was Reszell. The fortress was built in the years 1350 to 1401, almost on the very border of Warmia and next to the trade route leading from the Vistula Bay through Lidzbark eastwards. The entrance to the fortress was guarded by a cylinder-shaped tower encircled with a ring of loopholes and a massive gate tower closed with a portcullis. The entrance gate and the walls on both sides were equipped with machicolation, that is, protruding stone balconies with holes in the floor for tossing cartridges and burning oakum. In the 16th century, the defense equipment of the fortress was thoroughly modernized. 3 outposts were erected and were accommodated to the new demands of modern warfare, namely to the widespread use of firearms. Similar modifications were also introduced in other castles belonging earlier to the order or its subjects. Apart from Lidzbark, Reschel is one more example of strength and relative independence of Varmian bishops in the Teutonic state. The Pope Innocent IV created 4 episcopates: Helmian, Pomesian, Sambitian and Varmian. Out of all of them, it was only Varmian episcopate that enjoyed real autonomy. This autonomy was guarded long after the region became part of the Kingdom of Poland. The proud owners of Lidzbark and Reschel had preserved their titles of dukes until the days of Ignacy Krasicki. The estates of Varmian diocese comprised also the buildings and lands of the chapter. Here we see the famous fortified hill of the cathedral in Frombork, towering over the waters of the Vistula Bay. Varmian canons settled there in 1278 after their former seat of chapter in Braniewo had been destroyed by the Prussians. In the years 1329 to 1388, a tall and slender cathedral basilica was erected and surrounded by a circle of brick fortifications. Basilica, under the invocation of Our Lady's Assumption and Holy Andrew the Apostle, is a pearl of the Varmian architecture and also European. It is an example of a Gothic hall church. Its walls shield numerous living examples of past remembrance. A portal in the western porch representing the allegories of the sensible and insensible maids, hewn with minute precision in Gotland limestone, a late Gothic altar founded by Bishop Watzenrode, a 15th century crucifix in a rood screen arch, medieval tombstones, and a wonderful organ from 1683, whose sound has been penetrating people's souls and stone alike for centuries. Cathedral is an exceptional example of a fortified church. It served as both shelter for the local people as well as a point of resistance when under siege. The temple was protected by fortifications whose shape was adjusted to the topography of the hill. The irregular pentagon of this brick fortification consists of walls and high towers. The octagonal one in the southwest corner is the most magnificent. In the 17th century, a lofty belfry was added to it, which apparently changed its original appearance. The space in the eastern side is enclosed by the Bishop Palace. From the south, we see the main entrance gate leading to the fortress, placed between 2 semi-cylindric towers. The access from the west was through the so-called Minor Gate, guarded by a tower. The towers and turrets of Frombork were adapted so that the use of firearms as well as the defense against them was possible. A deep moat, the natural slopes of ravines from the west and the steep slope of the hill from the north added a lot to the strength of these fortifications. The so-called Tower of Copernicus is the oldest part of the fortifications around the cathedral. It is a living remembrance of the fact that at the beginning of the 16th century, for over 30 years, it was one of the canons of Varmian chapter who held up the sun and set the earth in motion. The body of Nicolaus Copernicus is buried in the basilica near the altar that was once taken care of by Copernicus himself, one of the greatest scientists of our civilization. Castrum Domine Nostra, the fortress of Our Lady on the cathedral hill, frequently became the target of war. Although burned down and plundered, it always rose from the ashes. Today, Varmian storks guard the fortress of Frombork. Let their wings carry us further on. Olsztyn. This castle was also built by the chapter of Varmia and was made the strongest fortress of all that were guarding its estates within the Teutonic state. The fortress was under construction from 1350 to the beginning of the 15th century. Its fortifications were linked up with those of the city that was growing at the same time. In the middle of the 15th century, the castle was given a new ring of walls surrounding it and new towers. Two residential wings became the main part of the building, connected to the defense walls, a cylinder-shaped tower rising up from the southwestern corner. In the south wing we shall find the halls of the Burgrave, canons and the castle's dispenser, and also St. Anne's Chapel. On the ground floor there were the kitchen, brewery and bakery. In the northern part of the fortress, which is the oldest, the residence of the administrator of all the chapter's estates was located, and also the refectory. In the 16th century, these halls were decorated with interesting crystal vaults. The most famous administrator of the estates of Varmian chapter was undoubtedly the canon of Fromborg, Nicolaus Copernicus. Above the entrance to the hall of the father of modern astronomy, we shall find an invaluable astronomical table made by the scientist himself, which has been preserved. It is right here in Olsztyn, where Copernicus wrote his first volume of the De Revolutionibus. This is on the motions of heavenly bodies. In the year 1521, as the commander of the fortress, he was able to successfully force back the attack of the Teutonic troops. The castle of Olsztyn has often been forced to endure wars and human cruelty, and yet it remains the symbol of human greatness, the symbol of what is immortal in us. We are now leaving the Varmian region in order to move to the very heart of the Teutonic state in Prussia, namely to its capital, Malbork. Here is the Castle of Mary, the patroness of the order, the largest fortress in medieval Europe. The fortress on the Nogat River in fact consists of three separate castles whose walls, often as high as 4.5 meters, enclose the huge area of over 20 hectares. In the Middle Ages, Malbork was often referred to as the largest heap of bricks to be found north of the Alps. It must have been very impressive. And it is so today, fascinating and intimidating at the same time. The giant construction was being erected step by step from the end of the 13th century till the beginning of the 15th century. It sloped down like a glacier from the top of the moraine above the Nogat River. First, the monastery part was built, later known as the Upper Castle. This major monastery in Prussia, which provided residence to 60 knights and priests, was surrounded by terraces and an excellent system of fortifications, deep moats, a drawbridge, massive gates, and machicolations, and the characteristic tower of the last point of resistance, which in fact was the castle's toilet. The spatial structure of the monasteries enabled the monks to organize their daily activities according to the rule of the order. Thus, there were appropriate rooms for prayer and penance, assembly halls of the convent, dormitories, refectories, and halls for daily duties. Malbork focuses all the most representative examples of structure and function of Teutonic castles across Prussia. And at the same time, its uniqueness means something more than merely the summary of the excellence of the other castles. At the very initial stage of the works on the High Castle, the Church of Our Lady was erected. It was the central location for the spiritual practices of the convent. It was the place of the religious setting that accompanied the election of Grand Masters, as well as, at times, the place for the execution of penance. The portal leading to the chapel, which used to be called the Golden Gate, depicts the idea of the Last Judgment. The procession of the wise maids led by Ecclesia symbolizes those delivered by salvation. combined synagogue leads to the insensible maids, the rejected ones. Gradually, more chapels appeared in Malbork. Near the church, the most beautiful of them was placed, the burial chapel of the Grand Masters, under the invocation of St. Anne. There were also separate chapels for visitors, for servants, and for the deceased. The defenders of the faith were not allowed to neglect their devotional practices. Priests were in charge of the daily and nightly canonical hours, in time of war and peace alike. The Lord's Prayer was frequently said, since the knights were illiterate and could not use the written texts of psalms. The Holy Communion was usually received 7 times a year. Great importance was attached to the prayers offered for the souls of the dead brothers of the convent, also those killed in action, and the souls of the order's benefactors. Capitulas, the chapter, was located in the north wing of the castle. Under its beautiful vault, reminiscent of the top of a palm tree, the so-called weekly chapters, conjoined with the acts of confession, were held. Also the annual general chapters of the order took place here. This Teutonic parliament, that considered of the state grand masters and the dignitaries of the assembly, had the power to lay down laws, to clear major financial affairs, and discuss the crucial issues of the policies of the state and the convent. On the ground floor of the west wing, the convent's kitchen used to be located. In different parts of the castle, a number of other kitchens were also found. Meals were cooked on a huge furnace with burning wood or charcoal. They were later brought to the refectory on the second floor of the south wing. The monks were expected to eat together. There were 2 meals a day, 2 courses on each occasion. On fast days, there was only 1 meal a day, consisting of only 1 course, and in place of evening meals, beer, mead or wine were served. During the meals, silence was kept, while one of the priests was reading out parts of the Old Testament. Dormitories were located on the first floor of the east and south wings. All the monks had to share bedrooms, except for the dignitaries, who were privileged to sleep in single rooms. A Teutonic knight went to sleep with his clothes on, so as to mortify his flesh and be ready for action at any time. The rule of the order did not allow to spend the night out of the castle, except for when at war. The dense network of fortifications enabled the observance of this rule, as the distance between 2 neighbouring ones usually required a day's journey only. The left wing of the castle housed the treasury of the convent, which was supervised by the treasurer. It is here where the dispenser of Malbork managed the grain trade on international scale. Grain for sale and grain for the use by the convent was stored in separate granaries and in the castle's attics. Each fortress of the convent had to store supplies sufficient for 2 years of continuous siege. The Grand Masters of the Order settled down in Malbork in the year 1309. In order to add to the fortress the air of that great political centre, the former approaches of the castle were extended in the 15th century, which resulted in the creation of a representative part of the fortress on the Nogat River, the so-called Medium Castle. Here, in this impressive palace, lived the Grand Master of the Order, accompanied by his courtiers, the chaplain, lawyers, the doctor, interpreters and builders. In those splendid halls of the summer and winter refectories, he ate his meals and entertained legates from numerous European countries. Here, also the most crucial political, economic and military decisions were taken. An exceptionally efficient chancellery was run on the floor below. The Grand Master of the Order enjoyed immunity, very much like that of a duke. He acted independently from episcopal legislation and was subordinated directly to the Pope. In fact, only in formal terms. Here is a monk and a great feudal master in one. He was even allowed to wear the garments of a duke. The other Teutonic dignitary, the great commander, occupies a part of the north wing. The other dignitaries, the great marshal, the great cloak master and the great infirmary master, reside in the remaining castles, where they also perform the function of commanders. In the same wing, the infirmary was located for the elderly and the deceased monks. The chapel, the kitchen and the bathroom were part of it. The 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century witnessed further works on the extension of the domestic buildings and implements of the fortress. The approaches to the castle, also known as the Low Castle. This area, surrounded by moats, defence walls and a ring of massive towers, became the location of a number of workshops, stables for 2,000 horses, housing for domestic servants, storerooms, as well as the main armoury of Malbork caravan. This is the way how the castle conglomeration of continent-wide fame was created over the period of 1.5 centuries. It played the role of the political and administrative centre, of the convent, of the military caserns and a fortress, of the base for further conquest, of a trade centre, and most of all, the symbol of power and a warning. The first half of the 15th century meant the decline of the order's power. The times of victorious wars and the times of wealth and prosperity were gone. After the defeat of Grunwald in 1410, the Teutonic Order did not undertake any major building projects except for the redecoration and modernization of the existing sites. The times of moral and economic decline came, the time of deadly conflict of the Teutonic Order with its own subjects and the conflict with Poland. The time of the 13 Years' War and the loss of half of the lands and fortresses, the time of the subjection to the monarchs residing at Wawel in Krakow. It was also the fate of Malbork, like the fate of many other Teutonic castles, to be taken over by the Polish King Casimir and to become one of the major fortresses of the Polish kingdom for over 300 years to follow. But anyone who hears these words of mine and does not obey them is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain poured down, the rivers overflowed. The wind blew hard against that house and it fell. And what a terrible fall that was. And this is the way the power and glory of the mighty knights of the Teutonic Order died out, very much in the fashion in which any other instance of power and glory is moribund on earth. And yet, in the remote realms of the centuries gone by, one can see the glamour that has not died out despite the flow of time. The glamour of the temples, the towers, and the castles is like the light of a dead star, mightier than